Okay, that's great. So, welcome back, everybody. I hope everyone is having a wonderful week so far. Today's session is Corporate Culture with Lisa Perez and Samia Ali. But before Lisa dives deep into that, I want to talk to you about some housekeeping stuff. So, first, I want to remind everyone that we're recording, and if you can, please be on camera, or at least be on camera when we're taking screenshots. And another thing is the status of learning assessments. So in comparison to the beginning of the program, participants are more eager to do the learning assessments. And I'm grateful for that actually. And tomorrow I'm also going to send an individual email to everybody with all the learning assessments from before. So it will be handy for you. If you have any questions, please let me know in an email or reply to that email. So yeah, Lisa, you can continue with the next slide.
Thank you. So last week we had Nathan Perez, and he shared with us his process for the 20-minute networking meeting. And we would like to know if anyone had a chance to follow up on their post-work exercises. So one of the exercises was actually from when David and Rosie presented to us, which was really around how do you build your network. And that was more of like sitting down with a piece of paper and with David's process and writing out, and then maybe typing up if you like computer work, typing up your resume, or I'm sorry, not your resume. I've got resumes on the brain, guys. Just really typing up all the people in your network that you want to get a hold of. So would just like to ask the group, did anybody do that exercise? Did anyone end up with a number of people on your A list? Which, if you recall, that was the list that we would all feel really confident approaching. Like even if we messed up our first networking meeting, we'd still feel confident, and the people that we were networking with wouldn't have a negative impression of us. So did anybody do that part of the post work? And it's okay if you didn't, but if you did, we'd love to hear from you. All right, is anybody planning on maybe looking back at that content and going through that exercise, because it is really powerful? I personally did it after I met with David and he shared that process with me, which was in 2015, and I still use it. So I hope you guys will really think about the resources and the processes that we're offering you and utilize them, because they really do work. The other assignment that we asked you to do was actually attending a networking event. So either doing a one-on-one event, or not a one-on-one event, doing a one-on-one meeting. It could be via Zoom, it could be via coffee, or going to an actual event where you are approaching people and introducing yourself to people. So is there anyone who did that in the last, since the last time we met?
So I didn't do that, but I know there's some networking events that sometimes I'll see on Eventbrite that'll be like, oh, business networking and certain things. So I'm interested in doing them in the future. I just haven't had time. But going off of the A-list thing you were talking about, I haven't completed it officially, but I really did sit down and think about like, who do I know in my circle or who's near me that I can kind of put on there. And you don't really realize it, but at least for me, I didn't really realize how many people I actually knew that were working in certain departments or working in certain industries that could be helpful. So that's kind of a takeaway I got from that.
Charity, thank you so much. And that is exactly, that's such a good point. And once you sit down and you think about everybody you know.
And Lisa, Amina said that she attended a party at RBC for soccer kickoff. at at her husband's work. So she said, does that count?
100% that counts. Amina, did you like, what kind of conversations did you have? Did you make any connections with people that?
Yes, I did. It was actually this morning. So they had a huge party. I wasn't really sure what it was about, but it was all about like Soccer United or it was all soccer related. They had some of the soccer players too for Minnesota, and they were giving out goodies. I met with my target is project management, so I met a lot of the directors and VPs and introduced myself. So I was hoping that that counted, but because I went through my husband, I was like, I don't know, does this really count?
Absolutely. Anytime you're in an environment where you are building relationships and getting to know people, either people you already know or people who are new, and you're just talking about your background, their backgrounds, totally counts. And I know, and I see we've got more people coming in, which is great. I know I'm going to call on Raina because I told her I was going to call on her. So Raina
Yes.
and I had a unique networking experience last night, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Okay, yes, of course. Thank you, Lisa. So last night I went with Lisa for a networking meeting, and the name it was Greeting MSP. It is about networking in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Is a bunch of nonprofit, and they was CEOs, they was leader from the community, and it was amazing. I find a lot of my friends there, and I have the opportunity to share what it is Prosperity Ready, and share with Lisa about my networking there, because it's, I think when you have the opportunity to have networking, you have opportunity to make a networking every day, because you can go, I don't know, maybe in a shop, coffee shop, and you see somebody is reading something, you are interested or something like that. You can have a 5 minutes talk about your book and share what do you do. And last night was nice because we met a lot of amazing people. We share some cards. So I'm working in practice to write an email, say thank you for have 2 minutes with me, and thank you for your experience, share your experience with us. So it was pretty nice. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, so it was a really good evening, and I'll just kind of add, Raina did know a number of people there, so that was just fun connecting and getting introduced. When we came in to the event, we sat next to someone we've never met before, and she ended up, her name was Claudia, and she's from Colombia. And she ended up knowing someone who Raina knows, who was also at the event. And from a Prosperity Ready perspective, from networking, our goal is always, when we're out in those kinds of networking events, we want to meet potential employer partners, potential participants. And so the woman that we had never met before in our lives and had 10 minutes of conversation with, by the end of the night, she works for Bank of America,
Yeah.
as a loan officer, and she introduced us during the reception to an executive vice president of Bank of America, who's responsible for all of their philanthropic giving. So you just never know where it's going to go. And I encourage, and sometimes you go to something and that does not happen. Like, that's kind of a magical night. But the times that does happen, where you get introduced to people, it can be a significant move forward. And sometimes there's just small steps forward, but you just never know where it's going to lead. So I encourage you all to get out there, make the most of whatever events, like Amina's event that she went to, like, who knows? She did that for her husband and, but that could pay off down the line in people who are going to be helping her get to her career goal, or even expanding just your universe of where you live and wanting to be part of your community in some way. So
Yeah, and can I add something,
yeah,
Lisa? So yesterday was a networking meeting, but before that, some of these people is part of my group, Latinos in BC, Minnesota. So it's funny because the first time I did networking, it was biking. So biking bring me some people in my life. So they have a lot of influences in the Latin community. They work with nonprofits. So every moment is an opportunity to make networking. So they was one of my friends. She is executive director of Latino Lead, and she is part of the group. It was another guy there, and he is part of the group. So I think every moment is a good moment to make a networking. If you have an event to go and make networking, it's pretty good to practice, even if you are not interested to make networking or looking for something about your job, but you have the opportunity to say, oh, maybe Lisa can help me to find somebody who knows how to explain something about resume, for example. Maybe it's not in my word, but maybe somebody else is gonna need it. So I know how we connect Lisa with this person. So I think every moment in our life, I mean, like a social life is easy to make networking,
absolutely. 100% agree. So we are going to keep going. So tonight we're going to talk about understanding corporate cultures, systems, and mindset. This one is really a lot of content. So I hope you guys are ready. I hope you're awake. Ask a lot of questions. Just raise your hand, interrupt us. AJ's going to be watching the chat. I'm facilitating tonight along with an amazing woman who has a great background. Her name is Samia. Samia, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the group.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samia. Nice to virtually meet you all. I will come in soon. I just got home from work. So I'll open my camera soon so everyone can get to know me. So a little bit about me. I am a Minnesotan now, originally migrated from California. I'm an African immigrant who moved here when I was like 10 or 11 years old. I'm a talent acquisition. I work at LORAM, but aside from talent acquisition, my background is HR in education and as career-wise. I have been a career coach before. I have been a sourcing specialist prior to this position. So yeah, HR recruitment, it's kind of my passion. Yeah, and I'm glad you're all in this program with Lisa. This is a very great program. We're all very thankful for Lisa in the community because she's doing an awesome job, honestly. I'm not only saying that because I know her, but because of this program. And since I've been helping volunteering at this program, there have been a lot of positive feedback from a lot of our peers and of course the students as well. So I hope you all are learning something and taking away something out of this program. And I hope that you will all also help someone else who is an immigrant, or at least they don't have to be immigrant, but maybe someone who doesn't know what you have learned from this program and kind of pay it forward someday.
Thank you, Samia. So while you get yourself settled, and I know it's, you're rushing from a very full day at work, I'll go over the learning objectives. And, we can just also answer questions if anyone have questions so far. So tonight we have a lot of learning objectives. So we're going to, I shouldn't even say learn how to navigate a corporate culture. It's learn how to attempt to navigate a new corporate culture. Cultures are very complicated. And we'll talk in a bit, like, what does that term even mean, that word culture? Samia's gonna help us through how to identify and handle team and individual microaggressions, which are basically displays of people not accepting other people who might be different from them. We're gonna talk about literal processes for navigating conflict. So life is full of conflict, the workplace is full of conflict, and even if you have a really healthy corporate culture and a good team that's working well together, things are going to happen where conflict will arise, and how having kind of a method to handle that can make all the difference between making it better or making it worse. And then we're going to talk a bit about building trust. The more we can trust each other, the more we're going to kind of reduce conflict and have more successful environments that we operate in. So this is kind of the flow, which goes with our learning objectives that we just talked about. So we're going to try to define corporate culture. We're going to talk about some really specific American-based things like organizational charts and hierarchy and things that come into play that typically nobody shares, that is good for you all to know. We're going to talk about how to identify the kind of culture you want to be in, a kind of culture that you will be, or an environment that you can be successful in. And then, like I said, we're going to speak to microaggressions and how to handle that. And when does it get to a point where your rights as an employee might be being violated. And we go into more depth on that next week. And then, like I said, we'll talk about conflict management and trust. So any questions so far? And AJ, you'll just have to, maybe when we come back from the break, do a shout out to get everyone on camera for a screenshot.
Okay.
And I see a question. Oh, great question, Hayden. Yes, we can take participants outside of Minnesota. Because we do everything on Zoom. At this point, we're so far along in this particular group that we wouldn't take new people, but we have a waiting list, you guys. So if anybody has been thinking about joining, or you came to a few and you just didn't have a chance to do all of the Tuesday night sessions, AJ's got a waiting list started. I think it has like at least 4 or 5 people on it already. So let us know if people are interested. The only shortcoming that we have being in Minnesota is that all of our employer partners are in Minnesota. So if someone's in Nebraska, I don't know employers in Nebraska that I can introduce your community member to. But that's not to say that they can still come in, gain the skills, and maybe be able to, do what, they can gain the skills. We just can't do those connections of bringing an employer partner in from Nebraska and saying, here's this amazing person from South Sudan. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and also we have another question from Carlos. Carlos typed, I have a question. When you say building trust, what does that imply?
That's a great question. And we are going at the end, at the very end, we're gonna talk about the 4 areas that help us build trust with each other as individuals and as teams. And it's based on a really good model. It's called the linkage model. And we'll get into that at the end, but it really is a way to take, trust can be a very emotional word. And the model that we're going to go through tonight takes the emotion out of that sort of conversation. I use this particular model for 9 years at Kohl's Corporation when I was coaching director levels all the way to chief financial officers and chief customer officers. So we'll have a fun conversation about that at the end. Okay, yep, good. Yeah. So we can put him on the waiting list for sure. And we can also share some of the, we can share the links to the Zoom sessions if that would be valuable to him. All right, so I'm going to keep moving here. So pre-work. Not all of us did our post-work, so I'm not sure about the pre-work. Did anyone have time? Who read the pre-work articles? Just show of hands. Otherwise, it might just be AJ and I talking about the discussion questions. And you'll just have to sit and listen to us. So we had 2 pre-work articles, and these are the discussion questions. So does anybody want to answer any of these? Like, even if you didn't read the articles, what do you think corporate culture is? Some of you are working in organizations where you can respond to, like, what do you think company culture is about? How does it work? How do you identify the culture of a company? We're going to talk about that in depth because it's super important. In terms of what are signs about a good or a bad or a maybe okay culture? What are the benefits of company culture? And what are key takeaways from the article?
So I can respond the first one, if that's okay with you, Lisa. So in the article, it's super simple. The answer is how everybody interacts each other together, how people feel in the office, the values, the respect, when everybody is on time and everybody respond in the meetings, this kind of that culture, when somebody have good communication and that stuff.
Exactly. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I believe Amina had her hands raised, so I think she wants to.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I didn't read the article, but I took a couple of courses in my graduate and undergraduate work regarding this. And I think identifying company culture is very important, especially when trying to find work. Partly because we spend a lot of our time at work, for example, 40 hours a week, and that's 80 hours per pay period. So trying to understand and align company culture, like how for example, how the CEO thinks, how the managers think and work, communicate, all that is very important. And I'll give an example. For example, Google. I had written my paper on the company culture of Google. To make life easier on their employees, what they have done is brought daycare to Google. They've put like foosballs and a lot of these sporting recreational things throughout their buildings so people can take breaks and not just always be working. So that is one of the signs of a company culture. Their company culture is to bring everything to the employees and not have them always be working. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah,
That's,
I think daycare. Oh, sorry, Lisa. Is like sounds more like a benefits for me. I think so. More data culture.
yeah,
Yeah, and
I think it's kind of both. I think it's a sign of, it's a huge benefit, and it's also about the culture that they want to be creating. Yeah, so I think it can be both. Marco, were you gonna say something?
yeah, no, I was actually just going to expand on that, and yeah, that seeing those type of benefits because will help you understand how the company culture is, and because like for example, I interviewed for Tesla last year, and I guess that actually answers a little bit on the how to you can identify the culture. And while I was getting interviewed, they were like, "Well, are you sure you want to be here? Because there's like super long hours, so you gotta be ready to work like 15 hours a day, and then like you gotta think of that. Like, are you married? Are you single? Because do you have kids? Because the hours are gonna be long, and you're gonna be spending more time here than at home. Like right away, you can tell how the culture is gonna be. Like it's all focused in work and putting your entire time into work. So those are the good and bad things that you can see out of just like interviews.
And
Well,
I think
that's a great, I'm glad you brought that up because that ties into next week. Asking you in an interview if you're married or single or have kids is illegal. It's against the law. So that should be like a giant, not even a red flag, like a big siren of like, okay, the people interviewing you don't know what the laws are, or either that or they don't care.
Probably the second one.
I was just gonna say, like, from what I've read, it's probably they don't care at that particular organization, but you guys are exactly right. Like this is a great conversation because they're all flags about what does the company, what do they care about is going to translate into the culture and the environment, and that's going to translate into how you get treated and what is expected of you. So this is great conversation. Who else? Charity, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and based off of what Marco was going to say, I always say too, sometimes a company's mission statement doesn't necessarily represent what the internal culture is like, because I know with medical, there's a lot of burnout and they'll try to address it, but it's like, it's still a continuous thing. So it's like there's positives as well as negatives. So just being on the lookout for that.
Well, this is amazing because basically you guys have covered all of my notes for the next 2 pages. So yeah, but this is good. This is how we learn the best. Like, yeah, what your flashy website says about your mission and your vision and your values, what we want to help identify is how does what's in words match up to what actually happens in the organization and in the culture.
And I think, sorry, if I can just maybe take it a step further and say it also impacts the type of employees or folks that you attract. For example, I also wrote a paper on, oh gosh, if I could pronounce it correctly, the the really expensive, is it Patagonia? Is that what it's called? Like they make the really expensive jackets, winter stuff.
Yeah,
like-
the retail company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So their culture is like, they're all environmentalists and I don't want to say like hippies, but it's like a hippie culture. Like that's just who they attract. There's no concept of like, there is a hierarchy, but there really isn't. It's all about, let's get this done. So the people that are more drawn to that aren't really gonna, how do I say this? They're not really after money. Are you guys kind of getting where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So I think all this is very important.
Yep. Absolutely.
And then you have the hedge fund guys, right? Those guys are like cutthroat. They don't care about anything. It's all about money. There's no relationships, nothing. So
Yep, and I think it's a good point, Amina. There is something, we don't want to make generalizations, but there are a lot of clues you can find depending on the industry. So industries do have certain characteristics. So that's another thing to think about when we're thinking about culture, and what kind of culture do you think you are going to not just survive in, but thrive in? Because that's what this is about. Getting to that place of employment where you are thriving and able to go down the path that fits your career journey vision. So we've already hit a ton of these points, which is great. That was a great conversation. Thank you, everybody, for participating in that. I'm just going to check. Company, this is great. Perfect lead into this next slide. We've got such good synergy going tonight. Keaton, is company culture written or both written and customary? It's both. Would love to hear what you shared, or what you experienced this weekend. Or do you have something you want to add to the conversation, or do you want to wait a little bit?
That's if time allows.
You're breaking up a little bit.
If time allows, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
No? Okay, that's if time allows, but you can go ahead.
All right, we will circle back because this is all about learning from each other. So we've already had a really good discussion about ways to understand a corporate culture. But I'm going to get into some kind of technical organizational development and design concepts here. So we've already talked about values. We've talked about the fact that what people put on their websites, but how they show up can be very different. I will tell you guys, from my 25 years in corporate America and Fortune 500 companies, how you get treated when you start the interview process is probably how you will get treated as an employee. So if you're applying for jobs and nobody's getting back to you, or they get back to you and they're not responding to you in a professional manner, if you show up for an interview and they're late and they don't apologize or give you a reason, if they don't have a smooth interview process for you, like as professionals, you should all have agendas for your interviews, especially if you're interviewing with multiple people. If none of that is in place, it's probably going to be a chaotic culture where, and that might be fine. That might be okay with you. Some people like that kind of environment. I'm the kind of person who likes structure. So that would not be a good cultural fit for me. So values, really paying attention, and I think somebody brought this up in the beginning. I think Amina and Reina, the way people behave is a huge sign of the culture, and it's a huge sign of how you will be treated. Degrees of hierarchy. So this is a little more technical thing, but how many people, so the CEO, there's usually a president or a CEO in charge of, well, kind of in charge of the whole organization. And then there's a whole bunch of layers underneath until you get down to, so there's what's called the C-suite, then there's management, then there's individual contributors who are actually doing all the work. If there's a really big stack of hierarchy, that's going to mean decision making is very slow. You might not have a lot of decision making authority. So if you're the kind of person who wants to be really active and you want to move fast and you want to get stuff done, and you have to go 5 levels above your boss to get approval to do something, that's a sign of a culture that could work for some people. Like if you want to be in government and move very methodically, that's an example of an organization who has a lot of hierarchy, a lot of layers to go up and down. So hierarchy is something, it's hard to figure out the hierarchy in an organization. Most companies do not post their org charts. But degree of urgency is another thing that is a sign of a culture. So how quickly do they make decisions? And these things you guys can ask in interviews, like what is your decision-making process? How quickly do you make decisions? How do you make decisions? Who is authorized to make decisions? So if you want to be a decision maker, you want to be moving and shaking, these are important cultural things to know. Communication style is another huge sign of culture. Again, totally valid, and this is a couple weeks down the road, but totally valid question to ask around how does communication occur in the organization. So there are organizations that make decisions between 2 people in the hallway. There are organizations who have forms that you have to fill out and send to different departments and send up and down before a decision is made. There are organizations where management never communicates with employees. And then there are organizations who get everybody into a room and the CEO is standing on a stage and talking to everybody. So communication style varies greatly, but it's a huge sign of culture. Another kind of technical consideration is people versus task orientation. So actually, we kind of brought this up already, which I was so excited for our discussion. So a people orientation would be organizations who are setting up things like daycares. They have really good healthcare benefits. They have workout rooms. People orientation means organizations who are setting up prayer rooms and accommodating people's values around adhering to different religions. Task orientation is what Marco was describing. How many hours can you work? How hard can we work you? These are the forms you need to fill out. There's nothing wrong with filling out forms, but that's just sort of a cultural orientation that you can ask about. You can ask for examples of how do you ensure that people are successful, and then what kind of processes do you want people to follow? And that can give you a example of that. Functional orientation. This one is getting really technical, but there are organizations who focus a lot on, let's say, research and development. And then there are organizations who focus on customer service. This kind of goes back to that industry discussion that we were having. So what is the organization focused on in terms of what do they deliver? Is it about customer service? Is it about a specific product like what, Polaris creates? Just really understanding, and when you're doing your research, understanding what are they functioning around? Is it a certain product, a service, or some other kind of orientation? Any questions on that? So we've already covered this. The reality is what's on the website is rarely what you hear or experience in the actual environment. So a couple tips: pay attention to stories that are told. So when you're interviewing, or even if you're in a current job and you're kind of like, is this where I want to still be? Like, what kind of stories are told? Who gets celebrated? What gets celebrated? And what accomplishments get celebrated and why? And how do those accomplishments get celebrated? And most organizations have subcultures. So there could be agendas happening outside of the larger culture that you want to pay attention to. So I will tell you the way I find out the most about a company's culture has nothing to do with the career page. The career page is marketing, 100% marketing. You are all serious, well-educated, very experienced professionals. If you really want to know the culture of a company that you're interested in, or even where you're already at, if they are publicly traded. So a publicly traded organization has to have shareholder meetings where the C-suite, so the CEO, the CFO, the chief marketing officer, sometimes this is a sign of culture. If the chief human resources officer is on a shareholder call, that's a sign that that's a good culture. Anyway, most have quarterly calls and they're recorded. Listening to those recorded calls and hearing how the very top of the house, the very top leadership interact with each other is a really good sign of what their culture. So do they interact respectfully with each other? Do they answer questions well? Are they defensive? Do they make excuses? Do they explain things well? Those are all signs of how the very top leadership is operating. The other thing that I recommend you guys do in addition to listening to investor calls is just go look at the investor page. So the investor page, it's usually at the very, very bottom of the website. It should have some written information about the health of the organization as it pertains to finances, which is something that tells you a lot about the culture, like, are they financially feasible? But there's also usually a lot of written releases that can, if you read them, you can kind of get the tone of the culture of the organization. And that's where you're really gonna hear, that's where you can kind of assess, does the career page and all the glossy statements about culture and diversity, equity, and inclusion, does that line up with how they're speaking to the financial side of the business? So that is a ton of information, you guys, and it's kind of technical. What questions do you have or comments? Does any of that resonate?
Can I share something, Lisa?
Absolutely.
So it was funny today when I was reading the article about Forbes, about the 5 ways to learn how about a company's culture. So last week, I'm a board member of Bike Alliance Minnesota, and somebody reached me out in LinkedIn, and she was like, hey, how it is being a part of the board of Bike Alliance Minnesota? How is that people there? So she make all these questions just share with us. And when we finished the conversation in the end, she asked me like, what do you think if I apply for the job position you have on your LinkedIn? And I was like, oh, wow. She asked all the questions she needs to know about the company before apply. So I think she has a good resume coach because it's everything you're sharing today. She asked everything to me before apply. So I didn't say yet the request about with Angela, who is going to be the interview. And she was like, yeah, I saw this lady who applied and it's amazing. She talked about you experience. I was like, yeah, that's amazing. But now everything make match with everything you're sharing with us. She is doing an amazing job because she did all of this you shared today with us. So thank you.
Yeah, so that's a great example of someone who did a ton of homework. So she probably, like, to get a hold of a board member and basically she interviewed you
Yeah.
before she decided if she was gonna apply for the position. That's, gosh, we need to get a hold of her and have her come speak. I'm curious, do you know how she was able to get a hold of you? Yeah, I know you mentioned LinkedIn.
I share in my Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So I share in all my social media, and she reached me out for my Facebook, I think so, but she talked with me in LinkedIn. She
Okay.
didn't do it in Facebook.
So
So
that's
she did
somebody,
professional way.
yeah, so that's somebody who was doing some serious detective work,
Yeah.
which is a good point because it kind of brings back, like, we can use LinkedIn, we can use our network, we can use all, get all the right questions pulled together like we learned last week from Nathan, and have that kind of interaction. And that is, creates a completely different sort of process when you apply for a job. So we are doing really good on time, and I want to circle back to Heaton. I'm intrigued by your question. Can you say more and let us know about the experience that you encountered this weekend?
All right, can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right, so I think it goes back to just what you shared before, and thank you so much for this program, for today's session as well. So I work as a general secretary. I volunteer actually as a general secretary for one of the South Sudanese organization. It's called the Equatorian South Sudanese Community Association. So from last year, I've been volunteering for them. And what we do, one of our biggest event is to hold an annual conference where we bring everybody all over United States. Those also want to travel from Africa and the rest of the world. If they get invitations and get visas, they are welcome. So from our last year's conference, we chose Utah State to be the host for this year, September. So unfortunately, I would say we have a system like federal, where the ERSCA, the organization, is the central, but we work with states. So all the states are affiliated. Utah has been one of the states that we do not have interstate office or state-related office. So basically, we had to form a committee to work with in order to, because they are on ground, they have to do all the logistics, facilitation, accommodations, everything. So we had our first meeting was in December, introductory meeting to introduce ourselves and what is expected. So all this time, we expected them to come up with a committee. And they called us back and said, we are done with the committee, let's have our meeting. When we went for that meeting, that was on Sunday, our expectation is to know the committee that has been formed, who is the general secretary, who's the chairperson, who's the finance, who's the treasurer, those kind of things. When we got into that meeting, the chairperson, a lady, came up with a list of terms of reference. And they had, of course, agenda items under the agenda for the meeting. And the meeting turned out to be, honestly, it took me by surprise. She doesn't know us. She didn't know maybe anybody. She doesn't know much about the organization because they don't have a state. The best thing as a leader is basically to ask questions. You probably find out from us that I know you've been working with different states, but not my state. Well, how do you work? That will help you understand best how the organization works and how you can fit in as a Utah state. The lady started out called Darius being disrespectful, arrogant, and it was beyond. The conference guideline that we gave them, she told me, this is trash. I trash your documents. I can't work with this. What? Honestly, that turned out into something else. So, from what we are learning today about company culture, I think the takeaway from that is that yes, you can be knowing there's no one single approach to everything. Do not expect your organization, whatever you use in the organization, to be what another organization uses. We all have different approaches and what makes us feel comfortable in our companies. So, taking time to learn about your, be it a partner organization or be a company, is very, very important. Otherwise, it will make you sound awkward, weird, because lecturing us actually, and she doesn't know that some of us probably worked. I sit as a general secretary. I worked in South Sudan with humanitarian for over 5 years before I moved in here. I've handled subrecipient contracts. I've worked with different diocese church related. I've worked with peace commissions. I've handled peace dialogues. So, like looking at us as literally we are not educated, we don't know how an organization should run. I was like, well, I just went speechless, and she was ready to fight you back and quarrel back. What I did was just to go silent and allow her to do whatever she wants to do. And so I just wanted to share that experience, how sometimes we can miscalculate and make misconception if we don't understand someone's company culture.
Yep, that's a great example. And I think it's another sign of the health of a culture is how curious are the people in the culture? How, what questions do they ask? How do they ask the questions? Do they do their upfront homework? So it sounded like this individual made a whole bunch of really wrong assumptions, and then came into a meeting unprepared, and then had really poor communication. So, yeah, if you were thinking about, if that happens in a meeting, those are all signs of, is that something you want to deal with on a daily basis if you were a candidate? Now, this was a different sort of engagement that Heaton's talking about, but still really great applicable lived experiences. So I think we're doing great on time. It's, oh my gosh, it's 6:59 according to my phone. So I think we can take a 5-minute break. Do we need more than a 5-minute break? I think we're doing good on time tonight. No, 5 minutes? Everyone's, I see nodding. Okay. Thumbs
5
up.
minutes,
Thanks.
okay.
Thanks, you guys. So when we get back, Samia's gonna take over and take us through the next few minutes, and then I'll wrap up with a little bit of conflict management and trust stuff. Right, see you guys back soon. All right. Let's see who's back from break by taking a screenshot before Samia takes over for us. I know 5 minutes is quick. It sounds like a lot of time, but. All right, is everyone back? Can you guys come on camera so we know you're back, and we're gonna do a screenshot before we keep moving here? There we go. Getting a few of you back. Is everyone back? We're gonna get moving here. We'd like to do a screenshot, but we can wait. The content's more important.
Right, should I begin?
Yeah, go ahead. And if people can just, as you come back from break, if you can jump on your camera for a second. Yes, please, Samia, thank you for joining us. It's an honor to present with you.
It's my pleasure. You know, I love volunteering at your organization, so this is also an honor coming from me too. Hi everyone, I'm back again. So tonight I would like to share with you all so a little background of microaggression. What is microaggression? And we'll just talk about a bit of examples of what microaggression is. I'm pretty sure you're all professional. You all probably know what a microaggression is, especially if you're a colored person. But because some of you might be new to the country, this would be very helpful. And if you already know, that's good. Maybe we'll teach you something new that you didn't know about it. Let's hope. So microaggressions, basically it's a statement, action, or an incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or an intentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as racial or ethnic minority. Now, let's talk a little bit about the background or the racial profiling history of microaggression. So, for example, well, I don't think we can show that video here, but for example, I would say, let's just talk about the example of it first of all. Someone speaks good English. Let's say you're a minority. Let's just use myself as an example. I'm a minority individual, I'm a Black woman. And someone tells me, wow, Samia, you speak such a great English. You know, one might assume that is a very good statement, but it's a hidden negative statement, right? That is an example. Another example could be, let's say an individual or a couple of people who are minorities were in a store, and the store owner or the employee of that store follows those individuals around, thinking that they have the assumption that those individuals will be stealing in the store. That's another example. Another third example I would like to share with you all is just saying you people, utilizing the word you people. That is stereotyping and generalization. So typically there's, of course, many other there are other microaggressions coming from school, work, you know, just being outside. But those are some of the examples that I wanted to share. Now let's dive into a bit of the history, I think, which is very important, of the microaggression profiling history. Since the beginning of the formation of the Americas people of color, They're oppressed as seen by the case of the Native Americans, the slavery when the Africans were brought in. After many years, when slavery was abolished, African Americans still did not have the rights to own their own property or acquire wealth. And the generations of families being ripped apart had a horrible effect on young Black men in the system, leading to mass incarceration rates, and more dysfunctional families paired with higher crime rates. As a result of the dark history, many African Americans are stereotyped negatively and are victimized to microaggressions. Due to the relatively lower socioeconomic status of most African Americans, there are still many people, some with privilege and some without it, who find it difficult to come to terms with the fact that everyone, regardless of a race, should be treated fairly and with dignity. This portion of the session is to help us to understand that microaggressions exist and should never be a limit of stumbling block in anyone's personal growth or career.
Yeah, and I think Cindy, this applies to just many different backgrounds as well. So I think we had done some research that was specific to African immigrants and African Americans, but I think it kind of resonates across the board.
Yes.
And we just really want to be able to open up the time and the space to talk about, like, what does this look like and how do you handle it?
That is true. This also can happen in many ways at work as well. And I'm pretty sure many of you will definitely experience this in some way. And the best way to handle, in my opinion, with microaggressions, yeah, thank you. I should have said next page. So microaggressions often appear to be a compliment. We talked about that. So microaggressions are closely tied to implicit biases, such as attitudes, stereotypes, and assumptions. The everyday slights, indigenous, put downs, insults that people of color, I believe, I cannot see that.
Yep, people of color, women, LGBTQ,
people of color, women, LGBT, yep, or those who are marginalized, experiences in their day-to-day interactions with people, by Derek W. Sue. So what do you guys think about microaggressions?
It's outside every day. I mean, even it's not an interview. I mean, you go to the shop, you go to coffee, they're like, oh, you have an accent. Where are you from? When do you learn English? And do you use before your English? It's kind of every day, I think so.
Yep, that is true.
I think
so.
Can I say something?
I would like to say something. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. That is a situations when I've been exposed of that, but sometimes it's part of the exchange of culture. You know, for instance, when if I go to, for instance, if I speak Spanish, if I go to Brazil and I try to speak some Brazilians, I will have some accents, but they realize that I am another Brazilian. I'm from somewhere else. I think sometimes it's a way of being empathic with another person, or of a way of being curious about the other persons. Sometimes it is not like wants to make fun of you or of your accent. I mean, I think it's just sometimes it's a way, and you realize sometimes you have this ability to realize there is something.
That's true. Sometimes it's curiosity.
Yeah, sometimes people are just curious about maybe it's the start of a conversation. So, oh, you have an accent, maybe where are you from? So in my idea, so totally I understand. So there are some other occasions that maybe they don't have like that good intentions. I don't know. It's my idea.
Oh, you're right. That is true.
Yeah.
Um,
May I say something?
Do you have
Yes.
something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think
yes.
I was gonna say the same thing, that due to the cultural differences, sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish between the microaggressions. I come from South Sudan. We love to joke around, also make fun, make make something similar to that. And then when you move to such a country where people are very sensitive, I think you will notice that people in America are very, very sensitive. Even the words that you use, it can be something else. So it can be perceived, but to me, all in all, it depends on the tone and how it's being said, how that statement came in. Just before we started the session, Lisa gave us 5 minutes breaks. I rushed to the restroom because I'm at work, and then I just walked in to open the office, and there's a minor student.
Oh, Hayden, I think you just went on mute.
They
Yeah.
have to sign their log, and then I just had my lunch, and the room had African food, and the student just said, "Oh, this place smells like African food." And knowing that I'm from Africa, and the student is an African American, so you look at all these, so it's a little, and how to distinguish between when someone is saying just trying to be curious or trying to use it to discriminate you. So otherwise, thank you for bringing that. Some of them, we just take them as friendly words, but actually they are not.
Yes. Yeah, thank you all for participating. Should we move on to the next slide? All right, so now these are the 3 main ways to react. Let it go, respond immediately, or respond later on. So I think with these 3 ways of responding to such situation will depend on your personality, your personal style, right? I think, in my opinion, this will depend on your personal style of the way you deal with conflict per se. So if you're someone that maybe likes to respond immediately, maybe that's what you tend to do personally because that's your style. So maybe you will respond immediately. For example, I don't respond things to immediately. That's not my personality. I like giving some time, but people are different. So these are some of the ways that you could respond. Again, that would depend on your personal style, of course, or your preference. But here are some of the reasons. So if you respond immediately, for example, this approach allows the transgression to be called out and its impact explained, while the details of the incident are fresh in the mind of everyone involved. Some might solve it that way because it's immediate and it's time they feel like you should solve it that way. Now, if you respond later, a more tempered response is to address the perpetrators privately at a later point to explain why the microaggression was offensive. That's if you choose to respond later. Now, with letting it go, for example, that would mean for a long time, the most common default, of course, to response was choosing not to address offensive comments in the workplace. But of course, we're moving forward as, we are tackling this problem better and coming up with better ways of dealing with microaggressions. But those are some of the ways you could respond. And of course, it's your preference to choose which one would be the best option for you in that situation that you're in. All right, so we recommend the following framework for determining which course is best for you in any given situation. And then if you decide to respond, ensuring an effective dialogue is the best way to go. So determine how much of an investment you want to make in addressing the microaggression. And I just want to mention before I go through all of this, you want to make sure when you're addressing a microaggression or just any issue in general, you want to make sure that, first of all, you feel content, you feel supported, right? In that moment, that you're also in a calm situation yourself, because maybe you are offended, right? At that moment. So maybe you want to take a breather, make sure you relax. You're in a relaxed mode when you're talking because you're at work. You're not in other place. It doesn't matter how you act in other places, but at work, of course, it matters if you love your job, of course, and you want to keep it. And of course, you know, you want to be professional about the situation and how to handle it. So with that being said, so discern is determining how much of an investment you want to make in addressing the microaggression. Consider how you want to be perceived, like I said, how you want to be perceived now and in the future. Disarm, if you choose to confront a microaggression, be prepared to disarm the person who committed it. Defy, challenge the perpetrator to clarify their statement or action. Decide, make a decision that will make your future career into consideration. Of course, all of those things matter. So make an action in consideration of these things in mind. All right, now we'll have a discussion of how you might have handled a microaggressions in the workplace. Or maybe you haven't even noticed it was a microaggression situation, but now that we're talking about it, maybe something popped up and you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't even notice that was a microaggression. So please share with us.
Hey guys, it's me. So I am normally like the avoidant type. I don't like to argue and I like to kind of ignore things and just let things go. So that's kind of more so what I do, because I'm like, if it's not going to matter in the next day or so, why even waste your breath? That's kind of how I go about it. But we've actually had a meeting recently on microaggressions, and it was stated where it is a good idea to get things down in writing. So let's say if somebody were to respond to you in a certain way, then you just email them back. So there's like a trend or something in the case like where you want to escalate it. What do you think of that? Would that be like an appropriate way, or do you think that's like escalating it a bit too high, or what do you think on that?
Like I said earlier, I think everyone handles situations like this differently.
Mhm.
But what matters at that moment is how you're feeling about what you're about to do. So if your mind is telling you that the right thing to do is to send an email, then you want to be, you want to make sure that what you're writing does not misrepresent your emotions. So you have to put that in consideration. That's why I said it's highly important before you react to gather yourself first. Make sure you are at a stable, emotionally stable state of mind before you can react to such situation. Because, you know, sometimes you might be writing not knowing what you're writing, but you don't know how that person might have taken your wording because of your emotions at that moment. So there's nothing wrong writing an email, I think, in my opinion, but it's the way you write the email that might be translated negatively.
I guess I was asking more in terms of like corporate, like what would like HR, what is their standpoint on it? Like seeing emails like that. Have you seen emails that kind of come across that way? Or sorry, I should have rephrased it a bit better, but yeah.
No worries. No, that's fine. Okay, so I personally have never seen such a microaggression situation coming into our HR department. However, I've seen other conflicts coming into our HR department. And typically what I see personally or saw before is when when someone is so angry, I don't like to see such emotional emails coming from other person, because it doesn't really translate as a professional person writing, in other words. I guess as an HR point, I would just say, okay, we would handle it, of course, because that is our job to do. But it's best not to. It's best not to aggressively write the email. It's important to write your email in maybe bullet points, stating what happened, digesting things. This is why I said before you write to an HR, it's important to digest that first to yourself, because then you can write better by expressing the situation in a place that's coming from at a level of calmness when you're writing that email. But we can tell when an email comes in, if that person is really very offensive, what type of email we're getting, we can sense it by the wording of the email. So yes, in the HR department, of course, we would handle it. And the way we would handle that is different ways, of course. It depends on, again, the style of, management style. Everybody has a different type of managing styles, like I said. So there's many ways to handle that.
Yeah, and I think, Charity, it also depends on what you're, and I think this was one of the points around the last one, like, and maybe we should even change this slide, like, what is your goal? So what do you want to see happen? What's your goal in, it sounds like you're talking about reporting something that's not only a microaggression, and we're going to get into this next week, but could be bigger than a microaggression and lead to like a hostile work environment where your rights as an employee are being violated. So something's happening where you can't do your best work. If you think that's what it's leading to, I think starting to document, as you heard today in your meeting, is important. But to Samia's point, if you feel like you can still do your work and you're not feeling threatened or unsafe, and it's just things that are inappropriate and you're not sure, like, is this inappropriate or is this a blatant offense of the company's policies and a blatant offense of my rights as an employee, you can start jotting down notes, date the notes. You don't have to fire off an email right away. To Samia's point, sometimes going home, thinking about it, reviewing your notes, and then like what happens the next day, what happens next week. And I love what you said earlier, and I use this a lot with my teams. Like you said, is this going to be a problem or will it bother me in 2 days? I like to think about, because this stuff is it's personal, right? It's personal. It's a sign of the culture, how people treat each other and what they're allowed to do in treating each other. But I like to think about, like, is this going to impact me in 3 months, in 6 months, and in 12 months? And if I keep going and going, like in 12 months, I'm going to be a nervous wreck and I'm not going to be able to do my job, then I'm going to start thinking about my strategy for dealing with this.
Yeah,
I would
and I would
like to
like to
share
add.
something.
Go ahead.
I must say that, honestly speaking, I had first those microaggressions at workplace. At that point, I thought maybe it's kind of discrimination, but it's done in a very diplomatic way that if you're not sensible, you will not really understand it. Sometimes when people are being allocated, because my second job is that I work in a dormitory for resident students. So one dormitory where the boys has a lot of work and it's difficult to deal with the boys because they can't keep their hygiene. But you would see that when people are being allocated where to work, you are being sent to the boys' dorm because they believe that you can do it, you can do the work. And at a point, people make comments like, I don't want to work in buildings, in such a building because it's dirty and it's a lot of work. And I'm on phone. And Gladys is free to be there. So, you know, those kind of things. And at a point, I would see how the management was managed, like kind of, I would see all discrimination coming in, cultural preference coming in. So at a point, I got fed up. And what I do is, if I have to send an email, I will, but I would prefer to have a face-to-face meeting to express myself. So I scheduled a couple of meetings, and one of them was actually with the director because I felt that was what the director was doing, going ahead to cut off my hours without letting me know because we feel I should take a break, and those are hours that I've worked for. So I did a couple of face-to-face meetings, and actually that worked so well because you're able to see the person and your tone of voice cannot be misunderstood, and you're able to express yourself better. And that worked to some extent, but of course, it has not actually resolved everything. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's
So
very
first of-
brave. Yeah, meeting face to face is very brave of you, but sometimes calling a bully, like if it's bullying, like meeting face to face and you're kind of letting them know, like, hey, I see what you're doing and I want to talk about it, can be an effective way to deal with it. Samia, go
Yeah.
ahead. We'll catch up. We've got stuff in the chat too. Let me catch up on that.
Oh,
while
okay.
you comment.
Okay.
No, you go ahead and I'm gonna, let me scan the chat.
Okay. So I was just gonna add, what's your name again?
That was Hedon.
Oh, okay. So I wanted to add that sometimes this is where I like to coach people, where how highly important it is to build a relationship with the people that you work with, in particularly your chain of command individuals. So like your manager, if you build a relationship with your manager, and I get it, sometimes we have leaders that you cannot build a relationship with. I totally agree. Personally, if I cannot build a relationship with the manager or whoever I'm reporting to, I will. Coming back to it now, you said you went to the director. In my opinion, coming from the HR perspective, we like to see people going to, and this is a good way of practicing how to handle conflicts, and we'll be talking about that later on too. Going within the chain of command is really highly important. And this is what we tell people all the time too when there's a conflict at the HR department. So who you report to should be the person you should be going to. Even if you feel like the director did you wrong, you don't go to the director directly. You have to go to the person you report to let them know. And I'm going to tell you in a little bit why that is important. So you go to the person you report to and you tell them, and you document this later on after you talk to them. But first you go to the person you report to, you let them know the situation in a calmly and professionally way without going crazy about what happened and getting offensive. You deal with that on your own. Then you go to them, you let them know what happened. Then you get quiet, let them respond to you. Whether you're doing this physically, face to face, whether you're doing it by email, whether you're doing this by phone, you give them time to respond back and see what they have to say. If they tell you they're going to do an action, ask them, when are you going to do that? Let them give you a time frame or certain, period. Then you wait and see what happens. If that person is going to do any action, if the person does not do an action, that's when you go up the ladder now. Okay. But that's the way to handle, that's the proper way to handle situations. And most likely you can win that way because you win on the chain of command. And when you work with the chain of command, then that gives you the upper hand later on. If the situation escalates to the director level, you're gonna say, well, guess what? I followed the chain of command. I went to the person I report to, nothing was done. I went to the next person, nothing was done. I came to you. This is the reason why I came to you, because I have been patient all this time, going to all of these other people, and nothing was done. I just wanted to share that point. And the reason why that is important is because you're also showing you're still respecting the person you report to and not bypassing their duty. Because the person you report to, their duty is to help you navigate with situations like this. So you're not giving them also, they're missing out a chance of learning. It's a learning opportunity for both of you too. So that's why it's also important thing to go to the person you report to.
And I'm just gonna go back to the chat. So Stas, you commented that you have this problem, especially with Russians. They hide political views and then they break out in offensive comments based on your nationality and your ethnicity. So I think that that's a very, your lived experiences recently have been very, very difficult. And I'm hoping that when you get to Minnesota that you won't experience that level of animosity and conflict. But hopefully what we're talking about tonight will give you some options in a situation where you'll be in a professional corporate environment and it's not going to be a life and death situation like many of you have faced in the past. This is going to be more of a cultural, and that's why we start with microaggressions, kind of subtle, rude comments that sometimes can escalate into either bullying or literal harassment, which is against the law in the United States, which we'll get into more details on next week. So, and I'm sorry that for anyone who has experienced any of this on any level. But Keita, you say considering all the extra caution one must take. Yes, retaliation is a real thing. Retaliation is also against the law in the United States. However, as you point out, it can also happen very subtly. So again, that's why talking about these different frameworks to decide, like, are you going to let it go? Are you going to do what Samia's, recommending and take this really measured step-by-step methodical approach? You have to evaluate, like, are you in a situation where you're feeling safe and you're just feeling like somebody's being it's not against the law to be a jerk. So I've dealt with a lot of employment attorneys and they will say it's not against the law to be a jerk. So maybe we need a slide about that. Like, is someone just being a jerk or a, what? I won't say the bad word. Being a jerk, or are they committing microaggressions or creating a hostile work environment? And that's why we have these two sessions. It's hard to tell that sometimes. So yeah, letting it go. To me, you guys, it boils down, and I'm a person of white privilege, so this is even a hard session for me to weigh in on. But as a female, in corporate America, I did have my fair share of white males telling me like, oh, you ask such, aggressive questions in the boardroom and you make people uncomfortable. And it's like, you wouldn't be saying that to a man. Totally different level, I understand, but how I want to frame this up is when I was in environments where I felt like that kind of attitude towards me as a female was going to hold me back from doing the best work I could do, then I had to think about, am I going to fight this? Am I going to say not acceptable? Am I just going to let it go or, suck it up in, the American slang? And what does that do to me what does that do to my spirit? Like, can I still go to work and do my best work? Do I have options? Can I go get a different job? If I can't get a different job, then I'm probably going to let it go for a while. If I can get a different job, that kind of changes my approach. So those are a ton of considerations. Many of those were not on the slide. We recognize that. This is just more food for thought. But yes, I agree with Baketa and Stas that sometimes it's going to turn into bullying, but to a couple other participants' conversations, sometimes if you're just like, hey, I know what you're doing and I'm not good with it, that could be enough to shut someone down. Or an email to HR could be enough, once you follow the proper protocol, could be enough to make someone back down. So we're at 7:42. This is great discussion tonight, you guys. Thank you. Anything else before we move on?
Well, actually, I had a question. So today I actually faced a situation where I went to buy some meat from an Arabic shop and someone, an American, started talking Arabic with me. So I was not offended at all. It was totally okay. I just wanted to know, is this a kind of microaggression or not? If I could have your insights about it. An American, like someone, a tall white person, started talking Arabic with me. But later when we continued talking, because I can also speak some Arabic, but I'm not an Arab at all. So he said that he was not an Arab too. Yeah, he was from America. So is this a microaggression?
No,
Okay.
he just assumed. Okay, it's not a microaggression. It's not a microaggression, but I would say he was being biased in a way, because he automatically, right, in his head, assumed that you were an Arab when you were not. So now, how could he have done it better? He could have just asked you. There's nothing wrong with some asking, hey, you look like you're African. Are you African? There's nothing wrong with that. Such, for example, people always tell me.
Okay, thank you, Samia.
Carlos?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
Carlos, what do you
I think that this is a kind of a very complex and sensitive topic, because I think here in the US, this is one of the melting pot of the world. So we have culture from every single religion, ethnicity, and dealing with all those complex tensions, and living all together here in the US. So I think it's like having some kind of respect, understand it. We're all humans, but don't assume sometimes people they can with their words and attitude can make some harms to other people without that intentions. But my point is understanding how multicultural is the US. So how can we fit and live together between all those cultures with So that's my idea.
Yep, I agree. I think there's a difference between trying to connect with someone on some level where you think oh, maybe I have this in common with someone, versus, someone saying, why are you speaking Spanish? Can't you speak English? You're in America. Those are two very different sort of things.
Yeah, I want to compliment what say Carlos. Sometimes some people make some comments saying, from the ignorance and ignorance is not a bad word. I mean, some people, they never have this interaction with other people, just white people. They never have before an interaction with Latin people. So they don't know how to ask you something. So I suppose it's the same with people from Ukraine, Russia, and other places of the world. I mean, actually with Somalis, the first time I saw a Somali was here, so I learned a lot about them here. So yeah, I think sometimes some people, they don't know how to ask the question, but they don't want to be aggressive, but sounds aggressive. It happened, I don't know to you, Carlos, but it happened to me sometimes. In Spanish sounds like something good, but when I say it loud in English, it's kind of aggressive. I don't know if it happened to you. But yeah, I think it's something like that because
Yeah, even when we speak in Spanish between some countries, some words are misunderstood in another countries. So yeah. I think we have to kind of like be having like a positive attitude and being tolerant and don't take it personally. Yeah, so and as Samia was mentioned, I mean, taking some time, reflecting about if this person was really kind of maybe that can happen or not. So, but maybe taking a time and think about it and before having like immediately response to something like that and to a situation like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to add too, you know, if that happens, let's say at a workplace and you feel comfortable, maybe it's a team member you have worked with maybe several times in a project, it's okay to ask them privately, hey, by the way, you know, what you did offended me, you know, what did you mean by this? Sometimes people can appreciate if they meant that in a good way, they will appreciate that feedback from you and actually apologize to you and would say, hey, I'm sorry, I never meant it this way. I think that's how you took it, but this is what I meant. That is also okay to approach. But like I said before you approach with such a situation, you just need to make sure, you know, it's just someone you feel like you know their personality. Maybe you've worked with them several times. If you feel comfortable, it's okay to approach in such way and just ask them, hey, I didn't like what you said earlier in the meeting or whatnot. I mean, what did you mean by that?
Yeah,
It's not
I
a bad
love
idea
that.
to do.
Samia, I think here's what I heard you say. What did you mean?
Yeah.
Here's how I interpreted it. That can open
Yeah.
up a whole really constructive conversation. So yeah, that is great.
Well, in the chats, we have another question from Beketa. Is the statement which says, in America, we don't do that, or in America, we do that, considered as microaggression?
I would say yes, in a way, because it, like earlier, what I said as an example, I said, you people, that phrase, you people, they're not particularly the same thing as what you're saying, what that person said in the chat room, but there's similarity to those phrases. It can be taken as microaggression, in my opinion. What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, and I think we're kind of also talking about intention and meaning and tone. So I'll just give you guys an example. AJ and I have conversations all the time about like the differences in American culture versus culture in Afghanistan, whether it's young people getting engaged and getting married. I mean, we talk about a lot of that, but we're not, I guess it's the intention of like, is the tone you're doing something wrong and you shouldn't do that in America? Or is it, this is a custom in America that is just something part of our culture that I want you to be aware of, versus, I guess if you feel like you're being judged versus being informed, that could be kind of another test of, is somebody judging you or criticizing you versus trying to be like, oh yeah, here's commonly how we do this in our culture.
Yeah, I guess me personally, this is how I take it, how I determine whether something's like a microaggression towards me. I feel like if the person states or says it in a way that they're better than I am, then it's a microaggression. But if they're stating it like they're just asking a question or they're looking for information on something, but they aren't saying it as if, oh, they are better or this race is better or this type of people are better, then I wouldn't take it as a microaggression.
Absolutely agree. Yep. You got to look into the way the sentence is used in the way the wording is used in the sentence. I think for you to figure out whether that is going negative or positive.
Well, that was really great conversation, and we've got 8 minutes left, so I can either go really, really fast through this, or if people are okay going overtime, we're going to talk a little bit more. We're kind of talking about kind of heavy topics tonight. So we do want to talk about conflict management, because we've talked about, like, what do you do? Like, is it a microaggression? Is someone creating a hostile work environment? Is somebody bullying you? Like, what do you do in those environments? And particularly these slides are about how to handle conflict when it involves a team. So we've got 5 different approaches. So the first one would be to collaborate. And this is also so you guys can kind of recognize how your manager is helping you and the team handle conflict. So a collaborating style of resolving conflict would be a manager who's working with everyone involved to develop a win-win solution. I will say this is like just knowing Samia. This is probably an approach that she would take as an HR leader in kind of bringing the 2 people together or the team together that's having a problem and talking about what is a win-win to solve the conflict. It's appropriate when the situation isn't urgent. So again, as I was saying earlier, if somebody's not crying in the bathroom, or they're feeling like, I don't even feel like I can show up to work. So if things are pretty, they're not escalated, really trying to find a solution is important. So the situation isn't urgent, an important decision does need to be made, but you need to make a decision that everybody can agree on. Having this collaborating approach is a good way to go. A competing approach is when a person takes a firm stand, and this is often seen as aggressive and can cause additional conflict. So a competing approach is something where maybe a team member or a manager will just say, we're done, there's no more discussion, this is what we're doing to move forward. This is okay if a decision needs to be made quickly, if an unpopular decision needs to be made. So we often use the term calling an audible. So like, that's, I think, a football term or a sports term, like, this is just what we're doing, everybody get behind it. It's not an appropriate style to use when people are feeling really sensitive or upset about the conflict. It's not appropriate to use if it's not an urgent issue, and it's not a good style to use when buy-in is important, because again, somebody's just making a call and moving on without people agreeing at some point that it's a good way to go. Compromising is the third one. This gives each person involved in the conflict something that contributes towards the resolution. It's a good style if a decision needs to be made soon, but not like super urgently. It's an okay style to use if resolving the conflict is more important than having kind of that win-win approach that we talked about in the collaborating style. And one of the things about this is that it's good to use when power among people in the conflict is equal. So if it's a team where everybody, like, have you ever been in a work group where everybody's an equal and there's not like a boss person who can just come in and say, this is what we're doing, and you all need to be able to get along? A compromising approach is a good conflict resolution. The next one is accommodating. It's a very passive form of conflict resolution. It's not appropriate to accommodate everybody when it's not going to actually solve the problem, because the problem is just going to come up again. So this is kind of another word for this could be placating. So just kind of putting a Band-Aid on the problem and moving on. It's just going to resurface later. Avoiding is an approach where people are avoiding the conflict entirely, just putting blinders on. People who use this style tend to accept decisions without question. They don't know how to engage in confrontation. And the only time when this is really appropriate is when the issue is completely trivial and it just doesn't matter. So just know that if you use an avoiding conflict resolution management, you're really not resolving it, and the conflict's going to grow worse because you're not paying attention to it. So there's no one way to avoid conflict, and sometimes you have to try different ways of handling conflict before you land on an actual resolution. So this is some of what Samia has spoken to already. So I would say this is even more important than what kind of resolution style are you going to use. These steps I feel like are really concrete. So clarify what the disagreement is. You can do this with yourself. If somebody has done something that has offended you, or you think they're harassing you or bullying you, just sit down and clarify. You can clarify with another person, and Samia has given us great tips on how to do that. Like, hey, I heard you say this. This is how that landed. You know, what was your intention? Establishing a common goal is really important. So what do we want to achieve here? And that kind of goes back to that collaboration step or approach in conflict resolution. How do you meet that common goal? How do you determine barriers? So what could get in the way of reaching that common goal? And then agreeing on the best way to move forward. And then the last one would be acknowledge the agreed solution and determine who's responsible for what in reaching those that resolution. So this process should be completed by all parties, and this is from some work called Conflict Resolution Skills for HR Professionals by Marla Bradley. Any questions, comments? Absolutely, you guys can take screenshots, and we record all these sessions, and then these screenshots are also in your binders. So you should have, for each session, you should have a set of, they're black and white printouts, but they should look pretty close. I guess you can't really see that. Pretty close to what the slides say. So any comments on that before we kind of wrap up? We're at 8 o'clock, and I do want to talk briefly about trust and then just quickly wrapping up for what's coming up. And if you have to leave, we totally understand. We will keep recording so that people who have to leave, if you want to watch the end of the recording, you can. So we talked about this early on. This is a linkage model. This model defining 4 areas that trust is built on can really take a lot of the emotion out of trust. So expertise. So to what degree do you trust someone else's abilities and their technical competence? If you don't think somebody can follow through on their project responsibilities, they don't have the competence to come in with the report or the research or the spreadsheet ready to go, you're not going to be able to trust their expertise, and that can start to create conflict in the relationship and in the team. Goodwill, we've talked a ton tonight about intentions. So to what degree do you trust somebody's meaning the best? So Carlos is a beautiful example of this tonight. Carlos gives people the benefit of the doubt. I can tell by what he said that he is always seeking that somebody is reacting to him and engaging with him in good faith. So some people have an abundance of goodwill when it comes to trust. Some other people feel that trust has to be earned, or goodwill, like you have to prove to me that you're going to approach me with good intentions. The other big area of trust is reliability. So to what extent do our team members, our co-workers, honor their commitments? Do they show up on time? Are they prepared? Do they make excuses? Do they, I think someone, Charity tonight mentioned, like, are they trying to make themselves out to be better than I am? That's all around, reliability. And then authenticity. So we can all tell when somebody's being fake, right? So authenticity is a big one. Another big part of this is just the depth of the relationship. So in new relationships, we don't know how we're going to respond to conflict. We don't know how we're going to respond to a project going completely haywire, or somebody being sick for 2 weeks with COVID and we have to pick up all of their work. Like, going through good and bad times with each other helps us with authenticity. It helps us with reliability and predictability. And it just helps us build trust when we have experienced life with each other. So those are, that's kind of a framework for trust. When I was coaching executives at Kohl's Corporation, which is a really big US based retailer, I would have executives fighting with each other to the point where we were going to have to, like, fire one of them because they were creating so much conflict. And I would walk in with this document and set it on the table and say, and explain it just like I just did to you guys, and say, okay, I want you to point or circle what area is causing a breakdown in trust. And then we would have a conversation about it. And it worked really, really well. So this is just something to think about as you guys go into new jobs, or if you're having, you want to build more trust with your own team members or your manager. As Samia mentioned tonight, like, having that relationship with your manager is so important. Think about how you're showing up in these 4 areas, and then think about if there's somewhere that you're being let down. Is it in expertise, someone's intentions, their reliability, or their authenticity? Because that gives you some concrete, just some concrete information to have a conversation about. Okay, so any quick questions? I know this one's going long. And you guys can always email us and put your questions in your learning assessments as well. So AJ, do you want to take us home here?
Yes, definitely. So we have two postworks actually one postwork. So we have a question. What are the three most important aspects of corporate culture in your opinion? And why are they? So, but be ready to talk about it in the next session and be prepared to discuss it. And the other thing, which I would not say that it's a postwork for this session because we also had it before, but in March 20, your final resume should be ready, and it's really important because in March 21st we are having our employer partners, and by then your resumes should be ready. Lisa, next slide. Okay, so next week we have corporate culture part 2 with Samia Ali and Lisa Perez. So I'm going to send you an article about recruitment and hire process. Be prepared to discuss that in the next session. And I'm excited about a panel of local immigrant professionals, which we are having at the end of the next session. So come prepared with lots of questions because I'm sure it will be awesome. And here you can see the QR code for the learning assessment. If you could get it right now, it would be great. If you cannot get it or if you miss it, I'm going to send this in the post-program email tomorrow, so don't worry about it. And as I said in the beginning of the program, tomorrow I will send all of you an individual email, and in that email you will have the assessment for all the previous sessions. So please take it, and if you have any questions, you can email me or Lisa. And before ending the program, one other thing I want to tell all of you is that if you could come to the screen so we could take a screenshot. I should have done it earlier, but I think still it's good to take a screenshot. Well, actually, it's not compulsory, but if you feel like coming to the screen, that would be great. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the week.